Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is, wherever you are, it is right now. You're right here. My name is Manuel, and it is my pleasure to welcome you. Today is day 43 of the show, and I have to congratulate you for making the best decision of the day to spend some time with me. Let's get started. Something very interesting happened this morning. Something quite historic, in fact. And I don't think most people fully appreciate just how big it might be. Around 7:30 this morning, the president of Cuba, Miguel Diaz-Canel, went on television and gave an address followed by a press conference. Now, normally when something like that happens in Cuba, it's either routine propaganda or some internal announcement. But this one really caught my attention right away because the night before, we started hearing that Cuba was going to release 51 political prisoners. This coincided with the announcement of the speech that President Diaz-Canel was going to give the next day, which was this morning. Now, that by itself, the release of political prisoners, is interesting. Because governments like Cuba don't just wake up one morning and decide to release political prisoners out of the kindness of their hearts. These kind of moves are usually signals, diplomatic signals. So when I heard that announcement, I thought to myself, all right, something bigger must be happening. And quite frankly, I have been thinking for a while that something big has been happening behind the scenes, given how often President Trump and Secretary Rubio have been talking about Cuba as of late. So when Diaz-Canel actually spoke this morning, my suspicions only grew stronger. Because when you read between the lines of what he said, and more importantly, how he said it, it sounded very much to me like Cuba is being prepared for something new, meaning the people are being prepared for something new, being ready to be eased into something new. You see, President Diaz-Canel talked about dialogue with the United States. He talked about mutual respect. He talked about sovereignty, of course. They always say that. And naturally, he praised the Cuban Revolution the way Cuban leaders always do. But the tone was completely different. It was soft. It was careful. It was, dare I say, conciliatory. And that, that is very unusual. Now, for a while, I've had a theory about what might be happening in the region. I believe the United States, under President Trump, has been executing a strategy that is primarily aimed at countering China's influence in the Western Hemisphere. Russia as well, to a lesser extent, but especially China. Look at the sequence of events. First, Venezuela. Maduro's gone, and while Venezuela technically still has its own government, in practice, the current leadership has been going along to get along with the United States to the point where one might even think of it as a satellite of the United States. The reality on the ground is that Venezuela is no longer acting as a hostile anti-American power that it did before, and has been very much open to just about everything the United States has been asking of it as of late. So once again, I say it is acting more like a satellite of the United States. Then there's the confrontation with Iran, which I believe has a lot, perhaps everything to do with global power competition involving China. And now there's Cuba. Cuba has always been one of the key pieces on the chessboard in the Western Hemisphere. For decades, it's been a symbol of resistance to the United States, but it has also been a potential gateway for Chinese influence just 90 miles off the Florida coast, and before that, of course, Soviet and Russian. So when I saw this speech today, my first thought was, are we watching the early stages of a strategic shift? But here's the moment that really made my eyebrows go up. Diaz-Canel confirmed that the FBI will be entering Cuba next week to investigate the incident involving a speedboat where 5 Americans were killed after Cuban forces opened fire. Think about that for a moment. The FBI entering Cuba at the invitation of the Cuban government to investigate an incident where Cuban forces may have killed Americans. This is not normal. This is the kind of thing that only happens when there are already significant conversations happening behind the scenes. Because historically, Cuba has been extremely protective of its sovereignty. Letting American federal investigators operate inside Cuba, even in a limited capacity, would have been unthinkable not very long ago. Which tells me that whatever discussions are happening between Washington and Havana may already be much further along than either side is publicly admitting. And that brings me to something Scott Adams used to talk about a lot: the dog not barking. Sometimes the most important signal isn't what people say, it's what they don't say. If you listen to Diaz-Canel's remarks today, something very noticeable was missing. There was no belligerence, no chest thumping, no insults directed at the United States, no talk about imperialism or aggression, none of the usual rhetorical fireworks that Cuban leaders, from Fidel Castro to Raul Castro and even Diaz-Canel himself, have traditionally used when addressing relations with the United States. Instead, the tone was measured, calm, almost respectful, really beyond respectful. And that absence of belligerency, that silence, that dog not barking might be the loudest signal of all. Because if Cuba were preparing for confrontation, you would hear it. If they were trying to rally their population against the United States, you would hear it. But today we heard something very different. We heard a leader who sounded like someone carefully preparing his country for the possibility of a new reality. Now, I'm not going to say that we're right at the verge of a historic breakthrough. I'm not going to say that that's guaranteed. After all, governments negotiate all the time without reaching agreements. But when you put all the pieces together, the prisoner release, the acknowledgement of talks behind the scenes, the FBI investigation, and that remarkably conciliatory tone today, it certainly looks like something important may be unfolding behind the scenes. No, let me be more specific than that. It certainly looks like something very important is unfolding behind the scenes, has been unfolding behind the scenes. And if I'm right, we are witnessing the beginning of a shift in one of the longest geopolitical standoffs in modern history. We are a witness to history in the making. All right, that's enough for today. We'll continue next time. And as always, be useful.